what if, let's stick with me here, what if Silicon Valley wasn't, the undisputed tech leader?
Interesting.
And the dollar, the mighty dollar, wasn't the global currency king.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where are we going with this?
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into the U.S.-China superpower rivalry. We're going to see if that's the future we're headed towards.
Now that's a topic that really gets the gears turning. It's one that affects everyone, in one way or another.
For sure. And to guide our deep dive today, we're turning to Ray Dalio's Great Powers Index. You familiar with that?
Oh, absolutely. Dalio's work is always thought-provoking.
Right. And there's this great report from Visual Capitalist that analyzes it.
Visual Capitalist, always top-notch stuff.
Exactly. So his approach is fascinating. He breaks down national power into these 8, key pillars. It helps us see past just, the simple stuff, like military spending.
Right. It's about getting a much more accurate picture of how these two nations actually stack up against each other.
A more holistic view. And when we look at that overall scorecard, just at a glance.
Yeah.
The U.S., they edge out China just slightly, but it's close, like a score of 0.89 for the U.S. versus 0.80 for China.
So the U.S. has a slight lead, sure. But it's the individual categories. That's where the real story is.
Oh, I bet. Some serious competition going on.
Oh, yeah. Some of them are nail-bitingly close. And actually, in a few cases, China is pulling ahead.
Okay. Well, that definitely sets the stage for a really interesting conversation. So let's dive into those 8 pillars of power. And I think a good place to start is with, tech and innovation. I mean, it seems like a given, right, that both countries would score high in this category.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both the U.S. and China, they're powerhouses when it comes to tech and innovation. But it's how they're excelling. That's what's interesting. They're doing it in very different ways.
Different approaches, huh?
Yeah. See, the U.S., they're still dominating in big tech, leading the way in AI advancements. Think Google, Apple, the whole gang.
The big names, for sure.
But China, they're rapidly catching up. But their focus, it's on things like semiconductors, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing. It's like they're playing this long game.
It's fascinating, right? It's like they each pick their lane. So the U.S. is going for that, the big splashy innovation. And China's building a solid foundation across, a whole range of tech. I wonder, though, if that difference in approach will make a big impact, down the road.
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Will Chinese more maybe diversified approach pay off in the long run? Especially, as technologies converge and new industries pop up, it's going to be a fascinating dynamic to watch, that's for sure.
It is. Okay, well, speaking of long-term outcomes, let's talk about economic output. Now, right now, the U.S. has this commanding lead, right? Their GDP, it's about, $10 trillion larger than China's?
Yeah, about that. But that gap, it's shrinking, and it's shrinking fast.
Yeah.
I mean, Dalio actually predicts that China, they could overtake the U.S. economy as early as 2035. But there's a caveat. That's if they can maintain a 5% annual growth rate.
Big if.
Right. He does mention, though, that their actual growth, it might be closer to 4%. There's some instability in their property market and some weaker consumer demand.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'd read about that. So even if it takes a little longer, I mean, the implications of this kind of shift are pretty mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
Imagine the ripple effects on global markets, trade deals.
Oh, yeah.
And then even just everyday things like, prices we pay for goods, global supply chains. It really highlights, I think, how interconnected everything is.
Totally. We're not just talking about, numbers on a spreadsheet. These are massive shifts in global power, and they have real consequences for all of us. It's a giant game of Jenga. Every move has the potential to completely reshape the whole tower.
Love that analogy. Okay, well, speaking of building blocks, right, let's move on to education. Crucial foundation for any nation, right? And the U.S., they have some of the most prestigious universities in the world.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But China, they've been churning out these STEM graduates at an incredible rate.
True. But, it's not just about the sheer number of graduates, right? The whole story is a bit more nuanced. The U.S., they're facing concerns about their high schools, kind of stagnating.
Interesting.
And China, they're dealing with some big inequalities in their own education system.
Well,
access to quality education, it's not evenly distributed. And that could have an impact on their workforce down the line.
so it's not just quantity, it's quality and equal access.
Exactly.
Almost like each country has its own strengths and weaknesses in this area.
For sure. But both agree, though, that a well-educated workforce that's absolutely essential for their future success.
Couldn't agree more. All right, now let's shift gears to an area where the U.S. has, traditionally dominated, military might. It's not a secret that they spend more on defense than any other country.
Oh, by far. And that's reflected in the Great Powers Index for sure. I mean, they're spending on defense more than double China's.
Wow, more than double, huh?
But the gap is shrinking. And it's shrinking fast.
That's interesting.
China's been, very strategic, modernizing their military in recent years. Some experts even believe, get this, they're catching up.
Oh, wow.
Or in some areas, maybe even surpassing the U.S. when it comes to, technological capabilities.
Surpassing.
Yeah.
The report also mentions the Global Firepower Index, which ranks countries based on their military strength.
Right.
So I got to ask, is it just about, who has the biggest guns?
No, it's way more than that. It considers manpower, how many people they have available.
Makes sense.
And technological advancements, geography, even financial stability, all of that plays a role.
Makes you think about all the different factors, huh? And of course, China's been forming these strategic alliances with, countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea. Adds another layer of complexity, right?
Absolutely. And this is where that idea of soft power comes in, right? Yeah. It's not just about, tanks and missiles anymore.
Yeah.
Influence, true influence. It also comes from things like cultural influence, economic partnerships, technological dominance, all that plays into it.
It really is like this giant chess game.
Right.
Where every move has these consequences far beyond the board. I'm wondering, even if traditional measures of, military spending are even relevant anymore in this crazy interconnected world.
That's a great point. The nature of power is always changing. And these new arenas, I think cyber warfare, and even social media.
Oh, yeah.
Those are becoming increasingly important to both countries.
Well, speaking of global reach, right, let's talk trade.
Right.
This is an area where China has made, some major strides.
Oh, yeah.
They're the top trading partner for over 120 countries.
120. That's incredible. It shows their focus on, becoming the world's factory. They've built this incredibly robust manufacturing sector and these extensive global supply chains.
They really have. But the U.S., they still hold a strong position in finance, right? And reserve currency status, that whole thing. The dollar, it's still the global reserve currency. That's got to give them a big advantage in international markets.
Right. But it's important to remember that all this interconnectedness through trade, it creates these complex dependencies. Remember the trade wars a few years back?
Oh, yeah.
Man, those tensions, they sent shockwaves through the global economy, show just how vulnerable everyone is to, disruptions in these intricate trade networks.
It did. I mean, it really emphasized that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
That's it.
One country's win, it's not always another's loss, and sometimes everyone loses.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this brings us to a category where the U.S. actually lags behind. This surprised me. Competitiveness.
Yeah.
China, they really shine in this area, but the U.S. scores below average. Yeah. Why is that?
It's really a reflection of China's economic strategies, They're aggressive. They're relentlessly focused on becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. Think about their massive investments in infrastructure, like that Belt and Road Initiative. And they're pushing hard into emerging technologies. They're playing to win, and their competitiveness score shows it.
So this isn't just about national pride or, statistics on a page. This has real-world consequences,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Jobs, innovation, even the prices we pay for stuff, it's all connected.
Wow. This is really eye-opening. Before we move on, what stood out to you the most so far? Anything surprising?
What really gets me is how quickly the balance of power is shifting. It's not, it's not static, it's dynamic, it's constantly changing.
A moving target?
Exactly. It's like, watching this high-stakes poker game. The rules are constantly changing, and the stakes are through the roof.
And it's not like, someone wins and everyone else loses. Both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, and watching that back and forth, that's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a simple win-or-lose scenario. It's multidimensional, like a chess match, but with global consequences.
Exactly. Every move has implications that ripple across the world. Okay, so we've explored, 7 of the 8 pillars Dalio uses?
Right.
Each one's given us, a more nuanced understanding of this whole rivalry thing. What's the last piece?
That would be reserve currency status. And it's a big one. Really crucial for understanding how global finance works. We touched on it earlier. The U.S. dollar, it's still the king, the top dog, the global reserve currency.
Right. But there's all this talk about, the dollar declining. And these other currencies, like the Chinese yuan, rising up.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Some analysts are even saying we could see a major shift, in the next few years.
There's no doubt that the yuan's role internationally has been growing. But replacing the dollar, it's a huge challenge. It's a mountain to climb. To understand why, you got to look at why the dollar is so dominant in the first place. Like, it has this deep liquidity in global markets. Basically, it's readily available and it's widely accepted for transactions everywhere.
So it's not just, China wanting their currency to be on top. There are these structural advantages that the dollar's built up over time. Decades even.
Exactly. And one of the biggest factors is the petrodollar system.
Okay, remind me what that is again.
Basically, oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, it's traded in U.S. dollars.
Oh, right.
So that creates huge demand for dollars, which keeps it strong as the reserve currency.
Gotcha. But are there any, cracks in the armor? Could something happen that makes the dollar lose its spot at the top?
It's not impossible, but it wouldn't be a sudden thing. It would happen slowly. Things like, growing national debts,
right,
rising inflation, even the whole cryptocurrency thing.
Crypto, that's a whole other deep dive.
Seriously, it's like that Jenga tower again, It looks stable, but it's vulnerable to the right kind of push.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
A lot of what ifs to consider. It reminds you that things change. The global financial landscape, it's constantly evolving. What seems like a sure thing today might not be tomorrow.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to understand what's driving these changes and to be ready to adapt.
I think you've done a fantastic job of, explaining all of that for us. We've covered all 8 pillars of Dalio's index, looked at the U.S. and China's strengths and weaknesses, even talked about some possible scenarios for the future.
But for me, what's even more interesting than looking at the national level is, the individual level. The report, it focuses on countries, right?
Right.
But what about the power of individual citizens to navigate all this?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's easy to feel like, a little bit helpless when you're talking about these big geopolitical forces.
I get that. But I think it's more important now than ever to remember that, what we do as individuals, it can have a ripple effect. The world's changing so fast, things are beyond our control, but being adaptable, thinking critically, being willing to learn and unlearn, those are the skills that matter.
So it's bigger than just which country ends up on top. It's about individuals figuring out how to thrive in this world, even when everything feels so complex and uncertain.
Exactly. Think about the power of, making informed choices as a consumer, supporting businesses that reflect your values. That has a real impact.
Oh, yeah.
And the influence you have within your own networks, starting conversations, challenging old ideas.
Remembering that we're not just watching this happen, we're a part of it.
Yeah.
Our choices, even the small ones, they matter.
Absolutely. And it starts with staying informed, like you're doing right now, listening to this deep dive. It's about looking for different perspectives, questioning your own assumptions, being open to new ideas.
It's about being a lifelong learner and embracing the fact that things are going to keep changing. It's not just about getting by, it's about thriving.
I love that. Thriving, even when things feel uncertain. It's a powerful image.
Okay, so we've gone through the 8 pillars, analyzed the dynamics between these 2 superpowers, talk about individual power. What are the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with today?
One of the biggest ones, I think, is that this whole rivalry thing, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not about one country winning and the other losing. It's this complex web of, strengths and weaknesses and choices, and the outcome is probably going to be something totally new, something we can't even predict right now.
And I think you've really highlighted the importance of, looking beyond the headlines. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day news. But taking a step back, seeing the bigger picture, that's how we make sense of it all.
Definitely. And finally, I want to emphasize this. These big shifts happening in the world, they can feel overwhelming, sure. But they also create amazing opportunities for personal growth, for people to take control of their own lives. By staying informed, being adaptable, and staying engaged, we can all help shape a future that's better for everyone.
I love that. A call to action. We're not powerless, even when these giant geopolitical forces are at play.
Yeah.
We can make a difference. It's been a wild ride, exploring this whole U.S.-China thing. We started talking about a showdown, but honestly, it's so much more than just like a head-to-head battle.
Yeah, it really is. It's a dynamic relationship. It's complex. And it touches, pretty much every part of our lives, from the tech we use to like the prices we see at the grocery store. It's crazy.
What really struck me though was this idea that it doesn't have to be like, one winner and one loser.
Right.
Both countries, I mean, they could gain so much from cooperating, working together, and the world, everyone benefits when they find like some common ground.
I totally agree. Think about the big stuff like climate change or pandemics.
Global issues.
Exactly. They don't care about borders. They need
Right.
everyone to work together to solve them, especially the powerful countries.
It's a good reminder that we're like all connected. Whether we like it or not, our fates are kind of intertwined.
And that brings us back to, what we can do. We might not be able to control what countries do, but we can control our own choices, our own actions. We can stay informed.
Right.
Engage in those conversations, support things that like promote global cooperation.
Yeah. It's about like remembering that we're not just watching this all happen. We're in it. And our choices matter, even the small ones. We can make a difference.
Well said. It's about owning our role in this whole interconnected world and like trying to make a positive impact, whatever that looks like for each person.
Well, I think we've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've explored, this U.S.-China rivalry, talked about the 8 pillars of power, even explored what we can do as individuals.
And this is really just the beginning, Keep exploring these ideas, seek out those different perspectives, have those conversations.
Right. And if you want to learn more, check out the full report on Visual Capitalist and, of course, anything by Ray Dalio on the changing world order. There's a ton of information out there.
And remember, the future, it's not set in stone. We're building it right now with the choices we're making, as individuals and as a global community.
So stay curious, stay engaged, stay hopeful. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.